Hello everyone. So, in this opportunity, I'd like to talk about storytelling because now we've come to the discussion of prose for English language teaching. But I think before we go to the element of prose, we need to we need to consider why actually story matters in our lives. So, yeah, in this material, I'd like to talk about storytelling so that we can have a new perspective in seeing the role of stories in our lives. Okay, let's talk about it. I think to understand the importance of a story, we need to have reflections. So, how important is a story, or how important a story is? We need to take a look at ourselves and what we encounter every day in our lives. So I'd like you to ponder a while about these questions. How important is a story to you? Do you think that story has no meaning for you at all? Do you think story is just a fiction? Or do you think a story is just those that appears in movies, just happen in a book, but doesn't have anything to do with our lives? So yeah, we need to ask these questions to ourselves before we go to studying the elements of prose itself, prose or fictions or story. And also, story is a basic of drama. Later, we're going to go there to drama and movies. Story is the core elements of that genre. So it's very important for us to realize the importance of this. Otherwise, this one, this one, what is it? This will seem useless for you. Okay. So sorry. So this quote comes from Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a Russian novelist. I think maybe some of you have heard about this quote before. How could we live and have no story to tell? How could you live and have no story to tell? If we realize about the importance of a story in our everyday lives, I think why the social media start to have this one feature, story. Like Instagram stories. Even YouTube now have a stories feature because as a human being, we need to tell about our story. We need to tell about ourselves, our story to the world. We need to tell the world about our existence. So if we take a look at the social media stories, and what about the advertisements? Many of advertisement using story as their core elements as well. By promoting their product, they give us a story. This is not just about the Thailand advertisement, for example, the life insurance advertisement that usually uh, looks like sort of movies, like short movies, but also the just the usual advertisement that we watch daily in the television or in YouTube advertisement. There are stories that they're trying to convey to us, and through that stories, they want to introduce their product. So even advertisement use this story elements to promote their product, so that we feel attached to that, we feel related to that. And also in drama and films. If we take a look at, okay, let's say films, because maybe drama is not so popular in our society. So take a look at your most favorite movies. If you realize that the story is not that rich, then usually it won't leave like personal impact to you. You know, like maybe the film entertain you on the surface, but some movies, like many movies now, has a strong story, have a strong storytelling, and what they trying to convey through their stories, they bring up many issues in our lives nowadays. Let's take a look at the Korean films. Yeah, I know that many of you watch Korean films nowadays. Well, at first, me, uh, maybe I also judge Korean movies or Korean dramas. They just sell this, what is it, their outward appearances. But actually, if you take a look deeper at their story, there are so many things that they're trying to say there, and it's not that shallow. This the story that they deliver through the actor and actresses' performances. There are so many social issues are also being brought up there, and that depth of story that actually sell the movies. You know that makes you um, makes you love the movies more, not just because the actor and actresses looks good, because the nuance of the movie looks nice or the music, but the story itself it's rich. Yeah, it's rich, and the more you feel related to the story that they tell, they brought up some issue that really happened in our lives, so that we are inspired, so that we feel related to that, and it somehow help us to solve problems in our lives somehow. That's what makes movies valuable. Yeah. And also in novels, even religion, politics, culture, like whatever. I think what if you question yourself, whatever you believe so far about yourself, about your identity, those are being told to you. That can be from your parents, that can be from your friends, that can be mostly from your parents or from your family. Your identity, whatever you believe about yourself, is mostly about what your family told you. Also about religions, and even in politics, they have a narrative that they're trying to make us believe. Yeah, about um, what is it, about maybe their plans and programs and system. And if you take a look at the history, even the word history is there. There's a word story. So yeah, it's that powerful. That story is that powerful that um, it makes us believe in the world that we live in now. What kind of world that we live now is based on what story you believe about it. And what about our memory? It's also based. It's formed in the story system. So it says that it's like everyone tells a story about themselves inside their own head, inside our own head, always, all the time. It's always told in the form of stories, and that stories makes us what we are, and we build ourselves out of that story. So if you want to change your life, maybe we should change our story. Okay. Let's take a look why story matters then. So Actually, what's important in the story itself is the meaning. So, as a human being, we all desire for meaning for our lives. I mean, when you are studying also, when it's not that meaningful, then then the process of learning become meaningless as well. So, if we take a look, if we make a reflection that this desire for meaning is often stronger than our desire to survive, because without meaning, like some people committed suicide because life seems meaningless to them. So meaning can provide motivation for survival, and that's what's contained inside the story. That's how important story is, and it gives us also a purpose. We feel connected by story. Yeah. So we are actually free to choose what story that we want to believe in, because that story that we believe about something about ourselves, about our surrounding, about our country, about our lives, that will define the circumstances that we create for our surrounding as well. Okay, so from the perspective of research and academics, yeah, that stories itself are very central to our cognition and communication. You know, in Bahasa Indonesia, maybe you have some friends who like to tell their stories, and they always start their sentence by the word ceritanya. Ceritanya begini. Ceritanya waktu itu aku lagi seperti ini. And then, like they start their sentence with ceritanya. When it's actually a fact, not a fiction. But they start their sentence with ceritanya. So actually storytelling is a lot more than just a recitation of facts or just events. Okay, and then I think I mentioned this before that even our brain experience what happened around us through narratives. Yeah. Because when we can picture something as real, when we know the story, we start to care about it. We understand it. If you don't know your friends' stories, you don't care about them usually. But if you know their story, when they started to open up to you, you know their story, then you start to care more about them. And so there is a little difference between how our brain processes information when we read or hear stories and when we experience reality. And that's why we can cry just by watching movies. We can cry, like listen. We can be so touched by listen to some sad songs, because there's just a little difference. Yeah, this is from cognitive research. Yeah, the way we process information when we read fiction or hear stories, and when we experience the reality. So I think there's just a thin line between the fact and fiction, actually. Because to our brain, we experience it the same. Alright, so why stories matter? Stories are actually universal. This is something that we need to talk further more about this. Stories are universal. What does it mean? Actually, there is this researcher named Joseph Campbell. He studies myth and stories around the world, and he found connectivity. He found similarities, that actually all the stories or all the myths, all the folklores, they tell the same thing. Yeah, they have the same pattern. And even though the stories comes from different culture and different nation, different tradition, they always have the same values. Yeah, we actually shares the same values. So the elements of stories itself are universal. It actually unites us, yeah, as a human being. And stories help us understand our place in the world. So this is what I mentioned before about our identity, about your belief, our beliefs, our tradition, our culture, our religion. And stories also help us to learn how to act wisely. That's why in a story they are usually, what is the moral lesson? The moral lesson. People usually ask that when they watch um, movie or reading novels. What is the moral lessons? Because actually through stories we learn so many things, and actually stories is the oldest way, yeah, to pass knowledge from the older generation to their descendant is through is by telling the stories. Yeah, is through telling stories. um, what else does the folklore trying to say? Yeah, it's full of moral lessons. Folklore here, I mean, like cerita rakyat, yeah, like legenda. There are they actually like trying to teach us something about how to treat other people, how to treat the nature. So actually, telling stories is the oldest way to pass down knowledge. You know that this means also teaching, but we will talk about this later. How the role of stories in teaching, and that will be interesting. But I want you to realize first about how important story is in our lives and how close, how fundamental it is actually in our lives. Okay, and then stories help us to shape our perspective about the world. So I remind you again and again that what story you believe will affect the way you act. So it's better that we realize that we choose our stories. Yeah? You have your ability to choose what story you want to believe in, and that's why it's very important that we are being critical also, because yeah, you don't have to live. I think when you learn also about being critical, we're not supposed to be that passive. Yeah? But living is being active, actually active to respond to everything that happen around us. So stories shape our perspective of the world. That's why we have to be careful what story we want to tell, yeah, which story we want to believe. And stories help us understand other people and their perspectives. You know, from hearing your friends' stories, for example, you you're seeing a life through their eyes, yeah, through their experiences, and that makes us more. It grows tolerance, yeah? And when there are more tolerance, we create more peace in the world. So yeah, it's very important to understand other people and their perspectives, because as a human being living in society, we deal with many problems, yeah, with each other every day. And by having various perspective, larger perspective, broader perspective, it helps us to solve our problems every day. It can be any problem. It can be economy, it can be just relationship within a family, in your study. Okay. This is what I mentioned before, that stories pass down knowledge and morals. So after we try to look deeper about story itself and how important it is, can you imagine a world without stories? So I want you to try to answer these questions and write a short essay, yeah, about this. Just maybe like 200 or 300 words. how do you picture the world, our world without stories? Because sometimes the way we understand the importance of something is by imagining when it doesn't exist. You know, sometimes you realize how much you love your family when you are far away from home, for example. So by imagining their absence, we usually gaining more knowledge, yeah, more meanings about about the subject. Yeah, in this case, it's stories. So, how do you picture a world without stories? What is going to happen in our lives if we don't have any more stories to tell? If stories don't exist anymore? Okay, so this is the assignment for this week. Next week, I'm going to talk more about the elements of story, elements of prose. Yeah. Actually, I gave you before in last semester, but I think I need to talk more about that. Okay, before you try to think of something, what we can do for education, yeah, for language learning, how to use stories in language learning. So uh, if our basic uh, if story is part of us being a human, I mean, that we are formed by our story thinking, that story thinking is really dominant, um, is very dominant in our lives, then maybe we should consider about story teaching. However, telling story is the oldest form of passing knowledge. So this is something that I want you to consider about. Yeah, what is story teaching? Everything that is being you've been receiving in classes so far in this semester, how are the story of those theories being told to you? So we want to consider this story teaching later, and how are we going to use this in especially in language teaching. I also will give you some examples, some works that I've made by using these story elements, yeah, like in movies, in explaining tenses, or yeah, mostly that. And it's actually not just in language teaching, yeah, but story also used mostly in explaining science. Okay, so what is your story? What is your story? But this is not the task, okay? I want you to consider what you believe in yourself so far. What is your story? What is the story that you believe so far, and how it actually formed the way you are now, from the way you think, from the way you believe about yourself, what you believe about our surrounding, what you believe about the government, what you believe about God, and your dreams for your future. So it's very interesting if we talk about this. Okay, so I think that's all for now. That yeah, it's a reflection, yeah, about the importance of story, and the task is to write your own reflection. How do you imagine a world without stories? Okay, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for watching the tutorial today. Have a good day.